Hi, everyone. Hi there. What a beautiful film. So excited. We have some amazing filmmakers that we cannot wait to invite to this stage with a combined 30 years of experience making films that bless all of our hearts and teach all of us. We're excited to welcome Joe Brewster and Michèle Stephenson. Welcome, welcome. So excited for this conversation. And if you all don't know, these two lovely folks have amazing work that exists. Many of you may be familiar with their award-winning documentary, American Promise. As a former educator, yes, love that film. I wanna first get into Nikki Giovanni. She's a giant and a gem in our community. This film, now exists and has been stamped by her now that she's older in her life. Tell us about how it came together, how you two came together with Nikki, who approached who, and Joe, particularly for you, with your background as a psychiatrist, how did that inform your approach and your goals to this project?
Wow, all of that in 10 minutes? So let me do the psychiatric way. So you see the film and you think of Nikki, but you really need to think of my mother, my wife, my sister, and the audience. This is about you. This is about our collective strength, and that's why I do this work. What do you think, Michèle?
No, absolutely right. I mean, it is sort of honoring, I call this sort of an anti-biopic, because it's really about honoring the impact of her words, both in performance and in text. We were both, as well, big fans of her, as she had impacts on our lives at different ages in our lives. And we were looking for some work to do after American Promise, wanted to do something musical, realized that was sort of prohibitive because of the financing, how much that would cost. And then we thought about poetry, and we were having a conversation and thought about Nikki. And beautifully, Nikki opened her door immediately. She's very easy to reach, and the rest is kind of history. It's taken us 7 years to do the film. It's a 7-year work in progress. Met her for the first time in person in 2015, came down, had a conversation. She poured some champagne for us. And then we had a camera there about 3 months later. So, yeah.
Amazing. And it sounds like you sort of deviated from the musical idea to just do what she does based on what we love her for.
But interestingly enough, the film itself is very musical. Mm-hmm. It's very rhythmic, and there's the poetry and the text and the cadence has a rhythm to it.
Yeah.
And when we say musical, when you watch a music film, the musician will play a song which is normally 5 minutes long, but they let you hear 10 seconds. So when you do a musical film, you have to create imaginative montage so you can get a minute into the film. Well, there's 20 films in this, 20 poems in
20
this
poems.
film. And so we were able to figure out a way to create montage so you're not bothered by the words, you're not waiting for the next scene. And so that's what we wanted to do with music. But this is better. We really enjoyed the relationship. We enjoyed the work, and I think we've grown as filmmakers.
I'm glad you said that. I want to get into the relationship, right? And I feel so weird calling her Nikki, as I want to say Miss Giovanni. So, but she's obviously a writer who really rests comfortably in her vulnerability when she puts that pen to the paper and getting it all out. We see she's a teacher, she's a healer, she's a soldier. How much time, did you spend with her in this process? And were there any moments, any stories, anything that you learned that was particularly illuminating for you in observing her?
I learned when I didn't like her, I needed to love her. And what I mean by that, Nikki's not easy, for those of you who heard me speak. In the first time I met her, she said she wasn't answering that question. And I thought about it, and I was actually blessed by her response, because that you wouldn't have given us that reaction where you laughed at me. But more importantly, she is a woman who has been able to overcome some trauma in her life. And the way that she overcame it, she made something bigger, a way of looking at the world, a contrarian way of looking at the world that really is illuminating, from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or Colin Kaepernick.
I think there are certain things that the relationship over the years, first of all, it was a tremendous opportunity to be able to spend all those years with her. But I think there's one thing sort of key for me that I take away, certainly as an artist, a storyteller. There's this line in Ego Tripping that I will not be comprehended except by my permission. And for me, that's sort of like this North Star in terms of dealing with people, dealing with systemic injustice, dealing with the everyday on one's own terms, and being comfortable with that, and that being enough, and being able to dig through that and sort of, and that can feed the creative spirit. So for me, it fed me more to be with her and to learn more. I didn't agree with everything. There are aspects of opinions and decisions that she's made, choices she's made that I don't agree with. But there's a way that she engages with her own humanity that for me is a guiding light, and has helped me be more sort of a risk taker in the work that I'm doing.
You make a good point, because my follow-up question for you relates to what you've learned and taken from her, and the ways in which you may identify with her or not, right? So, she helps us to think about and sort of sparks this idea around a natural woman, right? It's in the bio, she says it verbally in the film, and helps us to think about what the world would look like if allowed to operate as a natural woman, right? So from your understanding of, what you observed of her, how do you think Nikki Giovanni, defines natural womanhood, and how has that changed, if at all, how you think about natural womanhood?
That's a dangerous question. I don't know. I want to answer how Nikki thinks about what it is to be a natural woman, because I feel that is what the poem does. That's what poetry does, right? And that's some of what we've tried to do with the work, with the storytelling, is we put certain things out there. She puts the symbolism out there. She puts the text out there for us to take it, to relate to it, to grab what we can, get stronger by what we hear and what we see, and interpret it in our own individual ways. So I'm going to venture into not speaking for her in that way. So all I can say is, for me, the poetry has this impact that allows me to be more grounded and to ask the right questions of myself in whatever sort of things I engage in, if that makes sense. So, yeah. Joe, you want to say something?
I'm not touching that question. but
I asked her first.
I get that. But I really wanted to talk about audience and how we love audience. And like one of the experiences I had when I was like 15 at the Baldwin Hills cinema, watching some film where the audience was just raptured, right? So we like to think of making this piece not for you, but with you. And so we've developed this way of making film using montage and experiences from growing up, Michèle in Haiti and in Canada, and me in LA and now Brooklyn. And I think it's an African sensibility that we appreciate, and I think it's part of our filmmaking process, but it's a communal process. And so we'd like to think of you in the editing room with us. And it's an amazing...
Yeah, I think for me...
What was your mic?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, just to wrap up, I feel like her work, and we hope this film is seen as nourishment to continue doing the work that we feel is important and that can hopefully lead to greater change for the next generation. If you see, there's a lot of intergenerational conversation that happens and a time travel that happens, so we can be in conversation with, you know, those who were ancestors, those who are here today, and it's really, it's more about this sort of a sense of nourishment. To make the decisions, because we're sort of living right now where every decision that we make has a consequence in terms of impact. And how can this film, how can her words, how can a text provide that support to make the decisions that we feel are the right ones?
One last question, and then we'll take some questions for the audience. On that note, obviously being here on the island, I've been here for a few days, and what a strong, amazing community of Black folks to be a part of this time. It's deeply spiritual, it feels amazing, and there's a constant reminder of our ancestors. And even, I'm sure, in hard times, we draw on what our ancestors have laid out for us. Thinking about this current time and how our rights are being stripped of us constantly, one by one, what do you think is, or what do you want to be the charge from yourselves and from Nikki to younger generations during this time?
I didn't hear that question. I'm going to pretend I didn't hear the question. So I can talk a little bit about Afrofuturism, and that is, our future are the grandchildren. And so we've learned that from Nikki. But we want to give with our art, either poetry or filmmaking. And we don't have grandchildren, but we have some very interesting children. You saw them grow up in American Promise. And I think their grandchildren are going to be very happy with what we've done. So I'm going to leave it with that, because we would like to take one question.
Yeah, just one thing. One thing we did learn with Nikki. I mean, you see this, tremendous love at the Afropunk scene, which is part of this idea of passing the torch. And I remember her speaking to the act of listening as elders. You know, the idea of listening to what younger generations have to say and what their visions are. And I think this is more crucial now than ever in some ways, being able to create the space with that act of listening. And I think that's one of the reasons also that for us it was important to have the James Baldwin conversations with Nikki in the film. There's so many layers to that dialogue, both in terms of content, but one of the big takeaways was this intergenerational dialogue that was going on from an elder with a young youth that Nikki was, that I feel is sort of, again, a North Star for us in terms of how do we engage in an intergenerational dialogue that is respectful and somehow comes to a communion of being able to create change and listen.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Let's have a hand. Thank you so much for both of our filmmakers. We'll take a few questions from the audience. And I believe we have a microphone going around. If you have a question, we'll take one right here. Do we have a microphone to go right here? Any other questions?
You can state your question. I'll do my best. I don't have a hearing aid.
Oh, hold on. Say your name. Please say your name, where you're from.
Oh, Sharon Moore from New Haven, Connecticut, and New York City. Thank you so much for making this film. It's really awesome. I mean, I'm in my 70s now, and I cried through many of the clips because I lived it. And I remember the interview with James Baldwin, and I didn't quite get it when I saw it back then. And I listened more closely and, gave me a better understanding. But I want to know what are you going to do with this film now? Where do you go from here with it so that it can be intergenerationally shared? And it's really very important. So thank you again.
Thank you for coming. I would say that this is a very difficult year for film and documentary, but there will be an announcement next week that a streamer is picking this film up.
Amazing.
I can't tell you which streamer, but think 3 letters. And that this film is, what else can I say about this film? Don't worry about the film. What we would say to you is tell your friends to come out and watch it. It'll be opening in theaters in November. And we appreciate the distributor because they didn't ask us to remove anything. We wouldn't remove it. And we were able to give a message that we want you to hear. And so maybe they'll hear that in Cleveland now. Or I don't want to embarrass anybody from Cleveland or be using it in a pejorative way. So it'll be nationwide by the spring.
Amazing. Congratulations. Let's give them a hand. We have another question. Go ahead.
Yes, hello. My name is India, and I'm from Brooklyn. I live in Boston and also here in Martha's Vineyard. And before I state my question, there's a little message of hello from Natasha Gordon Chippenbetty. Yes.
Wonderful, yes.
And so she sends her regards that way.
Thank you.
So I appreciate your comment about the fact that much of this film is for us, the audience. But I was curious to know, what does Nikki think? Has she had an opportunity to watch your interpretation and presentation of her impact and her work, being both the subject as well as an audience?
So I think of this movie Groundhog's Day, where there's something that happens over and over. So Nikki is suffering from some memory issues. So she's seen it a few times and doesn't recall fully, but you get her response right after you show it. The first time she told us this was loving. But I think overall, she's agreed to take it on the road. She's going to London with us, and we're going to premiere the film. Is it public in London next month?
It's not public, but it's public now.
Premiered here. Thank you for dropping. You heard it first.
And another city on the East Coast that's pretty.
Yeah. She's going to be touring with us to a couple very strategic places, but every time she's seen it, she has loved it, but she's sort of has had to see it more than once to absorb. But the first time we went, it was November of last year, before before we even knew we had been accepted at Sundance. We showed the fine cut with a few of her friends and her spouse, and everyone was deeply moved by it. Her spouse specifically was like, it really sort of captured sort of an essence of her that they were very happy with, both Nikki and Ginny.
Another question.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Matthew Allen, also from Brooklyn. And I'm an entertainment and music writer with The Griot. I have a question for you guys, a technical question. Wonderful, wonderful film. And I wanted to ask you about just the aesthetic significance of all of the footage that was going in reverse in the film. I have my own interpretation of what that might be, but I want to know from your perspective, what was the choice behind making some of the footage go back and forth between going forwards and going in reverse?
What do you think?
I personally think that it's a reflection of her looking back on her past and how she was at this age reflecting on how the past was affecting her and her work and her life, and that this film was an opportunity for her to reflect on that point.
Thank you. I would also add is that we are using multiple layers. We're using verite footage, historical footage, we're using dialogue, music, and reverse images, all working with each other to lend a stronger message or more complex message. So if you see this film the second time, you may not see that. You may see something else. And that's the beauty of playing three-dimensional chess with storytelling. But I thank you for your vision, your interpretation, and I think, 3 interpretations ago we might have said the same thing, but now we're seeing something totally different. And I hope you will too when you watch it on TV with those 3 letters.
Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thank you. We'll take our last question right over here.
I just want to say great job. I'm Bernadette. I live in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and I was just thinking that there's a beautiful museum called the African American Research Library in Fort Lauderdale this would be such a perfect showing, and you all would be well received there. I'm one of the founders of the Women of Color Empowerment Institute, which is comprised of mostly African American women, and always very interested in work that inspires, captures the work and the great work in this case of Black women. So I want to thank you all for that, and I feel so blessed to be here and be a part of this. And I'm wondering if you would have an interest in coming to Fort Lauderdale. My husband and I are supporters of the museum there, and if you have retained any rights to for educational purposes, we would love to host you there.
So I'm not going to be funny, because I was going to start by saying we're not quite feeling Florida at this point in our life.
Especially that I think some of her poems are banned, too.
But we are very much into outreach, and because the film is not just to make money, it is to uplift, and it's to inspire. So we love to come to Florida, maybe after the current governor is gone. But hit me up after December, and we'll work something out.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you for this gift of a film, for this piece of education, for sharing it with us, for coming to this film festival. Can't wait to see you on, Will you two stick around and be in the lounge for folks to connect with you? Amazing. Let's have one more hand for Joe and Michèle, everyone. Thank you.